All right. Well, maybe we'll get started here. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'll pass to Neil to kick us off.
Great. Well, it's nice to be able to talk to everybody, and we're going to do a little storytelling and hear some interesting things about how to make your organization solar. So if we go to the next slide, I guess it's the agenda, Maddie. We'll do quick introductions of myself and Madeline. I'll tell you about the Discovery Museum and our story. And then, I'll turn it over to Maddie, and she's talk a little bit about Resonant and sort of the state of solar and why it's a possibility for all of us. So next slide, I guess. So this is me. I'm the CEO of the Discovery Museum, where I've been since 2009. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the museum in a minute. The museum field was sort of my second career, and I've been in it for 28 years. For my educationally, I have a science and energy and environmental policy and public sector management background. And, I can say pretty much anything I want, because at the end of the year, I'm retiring. So, you get nothing but the unvarnished truth from me. Maddie, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, great. Yeah, good to be on the call with everyone. My name is Madeline Barr. I'm one of the co-founders at Resonant Energy, and I run our outreach and sales programs here. My background is in energy efficiency, environmental education, solar, and did some work with electric vehicles for a little while. And I'm excited to be here. I think solar is this really compelling opportunity we have to transition not just what our economy and what our energy looks like, but how we work, and to really make sure that we have this opportunity to build a just transition, to use it to build wealth in underrepresented communities, and sort of change how we work as an economy. So excited to be here, and I'll chat a little bit more later on.
That's great. So I guess I'm going to tell you a bit about the Discovery Museum solar journey, and I think I'm going to do that because I really believe that at the core of taking on a project like making your organization sustainable and making your organization use renewable energy, it really starts with, what are your values and what are you committed to? And as this whole seminar or webinar is focused on nonprofits, I'm kind of coming at it from that perspective. So next slide. Just a bit about the Discovery Museum. We are a children's museum with a strong science focus. We've been around for 41 years here in Acton, Massachusetts. We are a pretty sizable organization in terms of the number of people we serve. We reach about 250,000 kids and families every year. About 200,000 of those are on site, another 50,000 out in our school outreach program. The important thing to think about as we're talking about some of our goals and what we're trying to achieve with solar energy and sustainability is that 50% of our audience is adults. So while you may be immediately thinking, oh, everything they're doing is aimed at kids, in fact, it's aimed both at kids and the adults in their lives. So maybe the next slide, Madeline. As I mentioned, we're about children and science, and we're about igniting curiosity and creativity, and then we're about getting all children to feel inspired to explore the world around them. And in part, that's to understand their connection to the environment and the natural world around them, and their responsibility as they grow up. If you could go to the next slide, our philosophy on this and our reasons for taking up solar are in part financial and our own sustainability, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at its core, we're about having an impact on the kids and families who come to visit us. And we're guided by this quote that I like to use from W.E.B. Du Bois, that says that children learn more from what you are than from what you teach. And by that, it means, we have to be walking the talk. We have to, if we're interested in kids growing up to be the next generation of environmental stewards, they need to see that we're doing that as well, that's where we're coming from. And that's represented, as you'll see later, in the sort of massive solar canopy that we have that's so obvious and prominent. But it's other things that we do on our campus as well, like all of our picnic tables, talk about trash reduction through recycling and composting and reuse. And so that is a good image of the kinds of things we do. The other thing that guides us, and this is particularly important for young children, is that we try to focus on hope and on solutions, because hope is a targeted way of seeing the future and taking steps to get to that future, and that we know focusing on solutions helps people reduce their fear of what's going on. And we know that ecophobia and eco-anxiety are out there among children and adults, and we're trying to combat that. So a little bit more, we can go to the next slide. As an organization, our sort of commitment to the environment goes back quite a few years, but the more visible actions are in the recent years. Back in 2015, we committed to really making outdoor and environmental education a chunk of what we do. We opened a substantial area in the museum focused on getting kids outside every day to play. And we changed our tagline to put nature in a prominent spot in our tagline. That wasn't enough, though. And so if we go to the next slide, we knew that we needed to really assess our own situation and have a plan for action. So in 2021, the museum adopted our first ever sustainability plan, and it was built around the 8 principles that are in this framework. And we outlined a plan of action that included at the time 29 action steps. And I could talk a whole lot longer on just the issue of having a sustainability plan for an organization and how you go about effectively making that part of the culture of your organization. But that would be a different webinar for a different day. You can all feel free to write me and talk about that. All of our plans and commitments are on our website, cleverly labeled plans in progress. And you can go to that and see our strategic plan, our sustainability plan, and our DEAI plan. And one of the most important things that we did was commit to reporting on a regular basis on our sustainability plan. Importantly, because of our discussion around the sustainability plan, we started to look very hard at our campus here and started talking seriously about a solar installation on the museum. And that was probably late 2020. We were doing this during the pandemic, which sort of has a lot of impact on our experience of this work, but wasn't driven by it. But at the time, and for those of you who are interested in how this works organizationally, we formed a board and staff solar task force to begin to really evaluate the options for us in how to go about implementing this work. And that was when we first began to interact with Madeline and the folks at Resonant, because one of the first things that we knew we needed was help. None of us, I don't know everybody who's on this call, but my bet is for the vast majority of people who are on this call, if you're going to do a major solar project, you're going to do it once, and trying to learn how to do this and make it work and pulling it off. If you're doing it one time and learning it, I would not recommend, sort of like, don't try this on your own, as they say. Get some help, and we can talk about that. So what happened here? Next slide. This is sort of the end of the story for us. We wound up putting in two very large canopy structures over top of our parking lot, which this project allowed us to reconfigure our parking lot. So there was multiple reasons for us to do it. It is a pretty substantial solar array with 856 panels producing quite a bit of electricity, and importantly, having a pretty big impact on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of this museum, and resulting in some pretty substantial impacts for a small museum like ourselves. So that's what it looks like. For those of you who have not been to the Discovery Museum, the main entry to the museum is at the bottom of that picture. You drive in, and the solar panels are sitting over top of our parking lot, and the museum building is sort of in the upper right-hand corner of that picture. We have a 4.5 acre campus dedicated to family learning. But literally the first impression you get of the Discovery Museum when you drive in is these very large commitment to solar energy. Just to back up a little bit and tell you about what that looked like from a construction point of view. As I mentioned, we did this project during the pandemic, but we were open, and we had to put these parking canopies up and over a in-use parking lot. And so the construction of this required a lot of coordination between multiple contractors, not only the folks who were building the canopies, but the folks who were reworking and reconfiguring our parking and the drainage around all of our parking at the same time. I would say that as a result, our construction timeline was probably a little longer than either you'd want or most projects would be. In the end, it all worked fine, and we were very fortunate to be working with a group of contractors who coordinated really, really, really well. But it was a long process, and it is not without disruption if you do what we did in terms of scale and over parking. But what's it look like done is the next slide. This is a little easier for you to see what I was talking about, the location of the parking and the location of our museum facility. You'll see up in front of our building, there are two big yellow objects. Those are school buses. So our panels needed to be 13 feet 6 inches above the ground, so that school buses and things could get underneath. It all works pretty well, but it is a big chunk of our footprint of our campus. Our solar display, and we'll go to the next slide, really serves two audiences. We just ultimately decided to size our display, our array, such that we could also be a community solar provider for other organizations. And under the rules of that, 50% of the power is used by the museum. That 50% of the power provides 100% of what were our estimated electricity needs when we created this project. So we are producing everything that it takes to generate the museum. Obviously, it all goes out into the grid and back to us in the form of credits, and Madeline can tell you more about that later. But importantly, we have 4 other nonprofits plus 10 low-income residents who are each getting 10% of the power, which is sort of displayed in the green on this from our project. We're really pleased with the fact that our community solar project is serving very local other organizations who share a commitment to equity in access to renewable energy. All those providers are off takers of our power, are able to purchase it from us at 10% below the market rate. So we're also providing a discount for them. And I think the next slide gives you a little feel for who all these folks are, including right here in Acton, the Acton Housing Authority. We're really pleased about how this worked out for us. Last thing I want to talk about here is what it looks like financially for us. For us, this was a really, our solar task force, who was really committed to doing this, was, completely sold when, through working with Resonant, we were able to model out the costs, the ongoing costs and the ongoing revenue streams for our project, and where the revenue streams include the electricity savings, that we're producing our own and not buying that from the utility, the smart incentive payments that come from the state of Massachusetts, which are substantial and were very critical to our project's success. And then the 50% of our power, as I mentioned, that we're selling to other nonprofits and as a source of revenue. As a result of those 3 revenue streams, and with the financing help that Madeline will talk about in a minute, our project was projected to be, and has proven to be, cash flow positive year 1. And the return on investment is pretty substantial. We had intended, for those of you who are out there in the nonprofit world, to fundraise for this project. Excuse me. Trying to raise the approximately $1 million that we invested in this. But that was also the pandemic. So as a result, we wound up fundraising to keep the museum afloat, and wound up borrowing the money to finance this project, and still are able to have a positive financial picture from this project. So all good stuff. So with that, I will give you my one piece of advice again, which is don't do it alone. The most important takeaway for me from this was, I'd still be sitting here trying to figure out how to put up a solar canopy if I was trying to do this myself. And we were very fortunate to find the folks at Resonant, and pleased with the work we did together. But with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Madeline and let her tell you a little bit more about Resonant.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, also from the solar perspective, how lucky we were to have a partner like Neil and his team with the Discovery Museum that had the appetite for an ambitious project like this. And I think, it's the epitome of how to use existing built space where there is space to really maximize our clean energy potential. So it's a really model project that we've been excited about, and I appreciate everyone joining today to hear more of that story. So I'll talk a little bit about Resonant and how we approach projects. We'll talk a bit about the Inflation Reduction Act and what it could look like for your organization to move forward as well. Please feel free to throw questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to take time at the end to go through everything. So So yeah, again, I'm Madeline Barr. I'm one of the co-founders at Resonant Energy. And our mission as an organization is looking at how to expand access to clean energy. We primarily serve nonprofits, multifamily affordable housing, and underrepresented low-income communities. We're based here in Boston. We serve all of Massachusetts, and currently just some parts of New York. We have over the past several years built over 200 solar projects for individual nonprofits. Here are some that you may be familiar with. One of our earlier affordable housing partners was Madison Park Development Corporation. We built solar on 17 of their sites throughout Boston, Roxbury, Nubian Square. Next to that picture is the building owned by Mujeres Unidas Avanzando. They built a solar project fully grant funded that covers 100% of their building's electricity needs. So they're able to, instead of paying for their electric bill, invest back in their family programs. Family Services of the Merrimack Valley, another flat roof installation up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And then next to that is another solar parking canopy example, Temple Imuna in Lexington. They also did a different project than this, but they did a low-income community solar project as well. So where does Resonant fit in, and kind of what to think about if you're thinking about doing solar at your organization? Our role is we sort of function as your general contractor. So we oversee construction, permitting, designs, installation, but we also have a team dedicated to the analytics. So the return you're going to get from solar is entirely dependent on your local policies, state policies, utility policies, and now, or really always, but more than ever, your federal policies. And so what our team does is we'll sort of layer on these different incentives and programs to help come up with a model that works best for your organization's priorities, financial constraints, interests. And then what we can also look at is bringing in different types of financing to help make it possible. So we do have third-party financing that I'll talk a little bit more about later on. That would require $0 out of pocket, and then a number of different pathways to ownership. So what is going on with solar? If it feels like it's sort of hard to keep track of what the current policies are, what the current programs and incentives are, that's because they are always changing. So we'll sort of give you our team's job is to really stay abreast of all of these changes to help inform you of what it looks like now and what it will look like when your project's ready to be built. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. If you pay the electric bills for your organization or your house or apartment, that we saw huge spikes. This data is from the Massachusetts utilities, but we saw huge spikes in, especially National Grid, Eversource, that are coming back, or rather came back down now as of this summer, and will likely are going to see spikes again this winter across the board. But just, yeah, all sort of, I think, felt to a lot of people that it came out of nowhere, huge burden on operating expenses. Oops. And in conversations that we've had with many of you, what we're hearing is that some of the biggest challenges as organizations over this past year, unrelated to solar, is operating expenses, increasing utility bills, heating, electricity, and cooling. And so one reason a lot of organizations are looking at solar now is because you could cut those electric bills between 40% maybe on the low end and 100% depending on your bills, of course, and your space. And then use those savings instead of paying the utility for your vital programming to support families, to educate youth, all of the important work that I know folks on this call are doing. And we also love seeing solar as a real visible educational resource. So this picture on the left is Neil and his colleague at a ribbon cutting for the Discovery Museum solar array back in May of last year, actually, May of last year. Yeah, a great event. And they now have this beautiful banner, and I know are working on a really visible display for visitors of the museum to see the impact and tie back this big piece of equipment and infrastructure with the actual power it's generating for their building and other nonprofits. And then the picture on the right is my colleague Rachel working with high school students at the Windsor School in Boston, pointing out how they can track the electricity production on the solar array that they really spearheaded at their school. And so my background is in environmental education, and absolutely love to work on projects where we can help turn this equipment, instead of being only a sort of power generating resource, really into an educational and organizing resource as well. Next I'll talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. So this passed in August of 2022, the largest climate bill that we've seen Congress pass. It's, I believe, a total of about $370 billion invested in clean energy initiatives and environmental justice programs. And it did a lot of amazing things. A few of the biggest pieces is there was a federal tax credit that was set to decline over the next couple of years and eventually just disappear. This they extended for 10 years and increased it. So it was at a 22% tax credit value. It is now at 30% as a baseline. And this is 30% off your sort of total project costs, which I think is actually maybe my next slide. Here we go. So, you know, this is equipment, installation, overhead, battery storage, utility requirements. All of this is part of this tax eligible basis. You know, and these are equipment, of course, is a big part of the project, but all of these other costs are huge components as well. So this is a really impactful upgrade to the tax credit. And then the biggest way that it might be affecting many of you here is through the direct pay opportunity. So this, it says that if you are a tax exempt organization and you don't pay taxes, you can still benefit from this tax credit as a direct rebate. So this is huge for nonprofits, so that you can see, and again, I'll get into some opportunities to increase, but you can see a baseline of a 30% rebate on your total project cost. And the we are coming up on the end of the very first application period for this, but what it's looking like is that you'll get that tax credit back, or that rebate back, likely 12 to 18 months after the project is installed. So we can also talk more about what that kind of bridge looks like. And so part of the legislation as well includes opportunities to see increased tax credit value through environmental justice adders. So I'll talk just quickly about these, and if anyone has specific questions about their project, we can follow up afterwards. But depending on where your building is located, if it's located in what's defined as a low-income community or a low-income census tract, it's eligible for an extra 10% tax credit adder, so a total of 40%. If you are an affordable housing organization, you might qualify for the affordable multifamily adder. This would require that the that there is a benefit equitably distributed to the tenants of the building. And then there's also a low-income community solar adder, which indicates that, you know, at least 50% of the power of your solar array goes to benefit eligible low-income residents, and there's a set value that they have to get as well. So again, this tax credit period is open for the first time, and so our team has been scrambling to submit about 90 applications. You know, so all those on the call now, you can be rest assured that if we start a conversation now, by the time we'll be ready to submit yours, we will have gone through it once. Yeah, and so this will be open, you know, starting this year for the next 10 years. So I'll go through some different ways that financing can look. So the first opportunity is just direct ownership. You own the whole solar array. You get the direct pay rebate or the tax credit, depending on if you're, you know, what your tax status is. So there's obviously the high upfront cost, but typically the largest benefit in the long term, because you're getting all that electricity value. And depending where you're located, you might also be getting some of that state smart incentive as well. And we are working with a number of organizations that are providing philanthropic loans. So that is something that we could explore if ownership is of interest. Power purchase agreement refers to a no-cost financing pathway where the solar is owned long-term by a third-party financer. They pay all the capital expenses, they insure and maintain the system, and you buy your electricity at a set discount. Typically, I would say that discount is between like 15 and 35% off your standard rate. And then we have a few different creative ways to do community solar. So if you're in the position where you have a larger parking lot or a larger roof than what your building needs in terms of electricity production, we have a few ways we can help you approach it similarly to the Discovery Museum and share that power with other nonprofits or low-income residents, or do a third-party financed community solar array. So if you've looked at solar before and it, you know, you haven't been sure how to approach it because maybe your electric bill is small, but you have this big parking lot, that is a great opportunity that we'd love to explore with you. I just have a couple of examples here that I'll run through briefly, and we'll send this out if you want to take more time to look at these examples. This is a PPA example, 96 kilowatts in East Boston, just to give you a sense of what these numbers look like. And so their year one savings are about $6,200, and they're receiving a 34% discount off their standard electric rate, off an R1 rate. A direct ownership. This is a project. It's a private high school in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, 280 kilowatts. So this one actually does also qualify for the 10% location adder. So their upfront cost is just about $650,000 with a break even at year 6. And they're getting $84,000 back in year 1. That does not count the tax credit. That's just in electricity and the Massachusetts SMART program. And so a little bit more on what that looks like. And this is what we'll put together for organizations interested in solar. We do a detailed cash flow and proposal generating to show you, year by year what your costs and savings will look like. So you have your production, your estimated electricity savings, based on the rate that you pay. This green column is the Massachusetts SMART program, which is a program that's sponsored by the utilities and managed by the Department of Energy Resources. And this is a cash incentive to you for either 10 or 20 years, depending on the size of your project. And then we have this column here for Massachusetts renewable energy credits. You'll see farther down in the cash flow, it will switch to RECs. The tax benefit, they're eligible for about $194,000. So it looks like we modeled only 30% to be somewhat conservative, but they are receiving the 40%. And we include estimated insurance and maintenance fees. And so that's how we land at this, this year 6 break even. So a really compelling cash flow within these new IRA policies. And there's just a quick comparison, because what did the cash flow look like before the IRA? And there's many different variables there. There's also, to note that the SMART incentive program does continue to decline, and equipment costs change based on U.S. national policy and tariffs and many different things. But just to give you a sort of quick idea, the difference being about a 4.7% boost in your internal rate of return with the new IRA. And so for a project that's about 50 kilowatts, $150,000, this column here, we have with the Inflation Reduction Act, so that 30% year 1 rebate, your return throughout the 25-year cash flow, and then this is the difference in the break even. So 7 years with the IRA, and probably for a project like this, 11 years without that. And then this, last example in a little more detail, the low-income community shared solar. Again, yeah, we would approach this and the analytics for this in a couple different ways, depending on if you are looking for a no-cost lease arrangement or a more hands-on ownership pathway, like with the Discovery Museum. And also now you could qualify for this extra 20% tax credit adder, giving you a 50% direct pay opportunity, which comes with some more requirements. So there's a bunch of different ways we could approach it. And what we would do to start is sort of talk with you, understand your organization's priorities, and then propose a pathway forward. Because there's such a focus now at the federal level, and I would say a sort of growing focus in more local, regional levels for looking at solar as something that we can expand the sort of access and equity of it. There are a number of grant programs right now available too for organizations that have the space and want to invest in a low-income, accessible community shared solar array. So if that is of interest, let's please talk more. So what you can do, wrapping up here, per Neil's recommendation, develop your own museum sustainability strategy, incorporate education and climate advocacy into your curriculum. Make sure your students and your youth are aware of this growing transition and the available jobs within it, the available opportunities within it, and then learn what solar capacity for your buildings or your campus can look like. And so if there's interest, I would love to talk more about it. We have a sign-up page here. We'll have our contact information available as well. Where we can do an analysis for you at no cost, just to see what programs and incentives you qualify for, if it makes sense to proceed. So with that, I'll pause and we'll go into the Q&A here. But thanks for everyone's time. Really appreciate sharing the story with you, especially at this exciting moment with the new tax credit that we have.
That was great, Mel. Maybe I could read you some of the questions, because a lot of them are sort of more things that you're going to be able to answer. And a lot of the questions are sort of very technical and specific, and this only again emphasizes my point about having as a partner in this someone who can work with your organization and the leadership of your organization to really understand how this works, because almost none of these questions can I answer, right? And yet I've got a big solar display outside. So did we, here is one I shouldn't know the answer to, Madeline, but I don't remember. Did we get the smart adder for low income consumers, thinking it only applied if low income customers were 50% or more of the capacity?
That is correct. So Discovery Museum's project got the smart community solar adder, but not the smart low-income community solar adder. So the community solar adder, and yeah, so there's like I'll also caveat, I think probably a lot of these explanations that now that the federal government has these new policies in the IRA, there's a lot of different sort of terms being thrown out depending on what the state considers a low-income community solar project and what the federal government now considers a low-income community solar project. But the specific answer to Jim's question here is that yes, this project qualified for 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the smart community solar adder, and we qualified because 50% went to 5 other entities. And then you're right that if they were to qualify for the low-income community solar adder, which is 6 cents a kilowatt hour, it would have had to, I believe 50% go to income qualified residents.
Well, that's interesting because in and of itself, I could go back and restudy that one. So another question, Madeline, which was sort of rule of thumb kind of question about whether there's a minimum solar canopy size over a parking lot that would make sense. Given that it costs a lot just to put that structure in, at what point does it actually make financial sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, exactly. There's a ton of engineering and steel and ground studies and site surveys required. We typically don't recommend it for parking lots that are less than like 100 parking spaces or so. We aim to fit a parking canopy of about, I would say, 200 to 250 kilowatts at a minimum.
So pretty big size.
Yeah, pretty big.
Keeping in mind what ours is 320 kilowatts, more or less.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it's a big project. Somebody asked whether the smart incentives are still available for National Grid customers.
Technically yes, but the value of them is so low that we have actually, for most cases, that we typically recommend getting renewable energy credits, the Massachusetts RECs, instead of the SMART incentive. Though it's possible that, and that's if a project is doing a behind the meter system or doing some net metering, it's possible you could get SMART if we're doing alternative on-bill credits, but yeah, they are available, but they're quite low. In fact, they're quite low in Eversource now as well.
Yeah, we were sort of in a good moment economically, although I would have liked the Inflation Reduction Act to have passed before we did our project. That would have helped a little bit. Right. So sort of another rule of thumb question about comparison of the costs of parking canopies to roof mounted things, and then a sort of bunch of follow-up questions on sort of the details of you know, what makes parking canopies expensive, and how do the processes for parking canopies compare to roof systems?
Yeah. Yeah, a parking canopy is significantly more expensive than a roof. I just did some quick math on my phone here. My guess is the difference is probably about 75 cents a watt, greater to do a parking canopy, which equates to maybe like $200,000 to $300,000 more to do a parking canopy of the same size as a rooftop array. So if you have a large roof, that's going to be a much more straightforward project. And it largely comes down to the, well, a bunch of things, but you know, underneath each of the steel pillars of this canopy is like a 3-foot wide in diameter concrete pillar that goes like 10 feet into the ground. So this project has a ton of concrete, a ton of steel, and just really requires robust engineering for structural, for the surface tension of the soil and of the ground, wind lift, that you don't have to do with a rooftop array, that you still have to do structural engineering and electrical engineering, but you already have an existing structure. So that's where a lot of the extra canopy fees come into play.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had to do some, we were doing a lot of reconfiguration of the parking lot anyway, so there was a lot going on out there. But you're right, if this had been plunking these guys down in the middle of an existing parking lot, it would have been an interesting construction project.
Right.
Someone asked, is there about being a small organization that they're interested in community shared solar? Is there sort of a minimum size requirement?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little hard for me to answer in the abstract. If you are a small organization, but you have a large parking lot or a large roof, and you wouldn't need all the power produced, then we could set something like this up. And it depends a little bit where you're located. Eversource East is a little bit more doable than Eversource West or National Grid territory. And then there's a few different ways we could look at it. We are working right now with a church that's fairly small. They're building only like a 35 kilowatt array, but it's producing about 15% of the power is more than the church needs. And so they're donating it to low-income residents, and they're getting a boost in their smart value through not the same function that I spoke about before, but through an additional multiplier that they can access. So there's a few different ways we can help maximize the roof. Yeah, Laura, I know that was a sort of rambling answer to your question, but yeah, happy to follow up with some specifics.
So maybe this might be actually the last question, and unless people write in some more. I've seen, you know, power purchase agreements where the rate is tied to the then current utility rate, for example, 15%. A few years ago, they started with a set cost per kilowatt hour with inflation adjustments. What's more common now? A set
That's a good question. Yeah, well, we primarily see, I think the latter. So we primarily see that, you know, we would lock you into a utility rate that is at like, you know, let's call it 30% below what you're paying now. And then it's set to increase each year, usually at like 1 or 2%. So it's set to increase much more slowly than than what we expect utility rates to increase at. So there's, so the savings come from a starting rate lower than what you're currently paying, and then also a much more slower rate of increase compared to the utility rates.
Well, one more question here. Have you had problems with grid availability?
Yes, we have. Yeah, throughout primarily National Grid, but also in Eversource territory, projects are getting held up for grid studies and system impact studies and capital improvement projects that can delay a project up to a year and a lot of money. Luckily, we have maps from the utilities of where these projects are going on, so we can flag it pretty early on if your project is going to be likely to hit one of these projects, one of these barriers from the utility. Yeah, it's certainly more and more that's coming up for sites, but yeah, we've been working and I think fairly successful at being able to identify them early. So if you have an address, we can look at that. Yeah.
I would point out that we were very fortunate to have an executive from Eversource on our board, so it did not hurt us that during the process, and residents did a great job of managing Eversource, and I think our board member was also an important asset. I mean, Madeline, I think for me, you just demonstrated my point of why you shouldn't take on this as an organization by yourself. These are all the kind of questions that you would love to have in a committee meeting or a board meeting, discussing like a project like this, and have someone who's got enough experience in this to be able to give good informed answers and help your organization figure out that you're willing to take on a project like this. So it was a great example.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Super. Well, yeah.
The last question, if you want to answer it, how do you get paid?
How do we get paid? Yeah, great question. So Resonant, we function again as like a general contractor. So our payment comes as a portion of the total development cost. Typically for a project, it's like 15 to 20%. And it's often called the developer's fee, or again, similar to a general contractor.
And all of our economic analysis took that into account.
Yeah, so that's factored in to the, when we do a proposal, our fee is factored in up front, so we don't charge for the proposal and for the analytics. And then if you do want to move forward with what we've presented, you would sign a letter of intent, and then we dive into the site visits. We get our engineer out. We start on getting the utility approvals and moving forward there. But yeah, it's you would see it right up front when we're looking at the numbers and the cash flow and how it all fits in.
Yeah. Looks like we're kind of right at our 1 hour mark, which we're either really good or really lucky.
Great. Super. All right. Yeah, well, please follow up with either of us if we can help. And yeah, would love to continue some of these conversations and next steps. Thanks everyone for joining and for the time.
Great. Thank you. Madeline, see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.